Hi, my name's Douglas Kornfeld, and I was selected for this project over 3 years ago. I originally sent in my images based on a call for images for this project, and I was selected as a finalist by the Hyde Square Task Force to do a sculpture for Mozart Park, which is a small community park in the Hyde Square part of Jamaica Plain, Boston. And I was selected one of 3 finalists, and I went in for an interview and I showed them my images and talked in depth about my past projects. But I think what swung me to win the commission was that I really told them how committed I was to working with the community in developing my design. And I was selected and then immediately had to start learning something about the community because I'm not from that part of Boston, and so I did what I could to learn, by reading about the community, but I really wanted to meet people. And the commissioning agency that selected me is known as the Hyde Square Task Force, which is a do-gooder organization in that part of Jamaica Plain, and they work with young people. And so what I proposed originally was to do a series of workshops with the kids to give them some computer skills. I teach computers, I teach web design, I teach graphic design, as well as being an artist. And so a friend of mine and I developed some curriculum, and we had, I think, 4 or 5 weeks of workshops, 2 or 3 hours each workshop, with about 10 kids. And we basically taught them some computer skills using, teaching them Photoshop, which is a photo design, photo editing software. But along with teaching them, they were really teaching me, even though they didn't know that at the time. Because I didn't know these kids, I didn't know this neighborhood, I didn't know anything about them. And for what I immediately learned is that almost all of them were Latino, and most of them were Dominican, or of Dominican descent. They were either immigrants or children of recent immigrants. And we'd have the workshops, but there was plenty of time when they were working themselves on the computer. And so they would talk amongst themselves and kind of ignore the fact that I was even in the room, which was kind of funny because it was almost like they knew I was there, but they talked as if I wasn't there. And I learned a lot about them. I learned about them and their community. And one of them mentioned, oh yeah, my mother was deported last month, which just is stunning to me. It just, my God, your mother was deported. And they talked about it almost in a matter-of-fact way. It wasn't an unusual event in their lives or in their community to have a family member or relative deported. So a lot of their family, or a lot of them, were illegal immigrants. And so I listened to this and learned probably more than they did out of these workshops. And I really felt like I started to get to know the community because of talking with these kids over these weekly workshops. And at the end of the workshops, they developed some images, which they got copies of and so forth. But at the end of the workshops, I had a whole head full of impressions about Hyde Square, about these kids, about the Hyde Square community. And this is what inspired my piece. It was funny, right after I was selected for the project, immediately the jury said, oh, okay, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I don't think they believed me, but I said, I honestly don't know. I want to be inspired. I want to know what is going on with the community. I want my piece or whatever I do to relate to the community. And I think they weren't quite convinced of that. They thought, oh yeah, that's a good thing to say, but what are you really going to do? But I was true. I honestly had no idea what I was going to do until I had done these workshops. And from that, I said, I want to do something that addresses the issue of being an immigrant to America, and a recent immigrant. And a little bit of what I learned about the community, Mozart Park, where the sculpture exists, is it's always been an immigrant community. It was originally settled by German immigrants, and there's where the name of the park came from, Mozart Park. And after it was a German neighborhood, it became an Irish neighborhood. And after an Irish neighborhood, it became African American. And now it's a mixture of African American and Latino, though I think it's predominantly Latino now. So that was a very important part of my thinking when I started coming up with my idea. And so what do all immigrants have in common? I mean, especially these days, there's such an anti-immigrant ethos in the political spectrum right now. They say, oh, these people, they just come, they don't want to work, they don't care, they just want our jobs, or they just want to freeload. And you stop and you listen to these people and you talk to them. People don't leave their country. They don't leave their relatives. They don't leave their home for fun or to freeload. They leave because they're desperate, because they are really desperate for a better life. Things have to be really bad where you live to want to leave that, especially for a harsh climate. I mean, these people are from the Caribbean where it's warm and pleasant, and Boston weather is anything but pleasant, especially this year. So they're here. Why are they here? They're here for a better life. And so what's emblematic of an immigrant's life? They're trying to climb the ladder of success. They want to better themselves. They want to make their lives better, if not for themselves, at least for their children. And so the image of climbing the ladder of success, which is the American dream, really is what inspired my piece. And my piece is an image of an arm reaching up, reaching for the sky. And it's made up of stainless steel tube. Each tube is 8 inches square, about that big. And each tube is kind of contorted and bent, and it's a number of pieces welded together into various shapes. And then these 5 verticals coalesce into the form of the upreaching arm. And I wanted to do something that was recognizable, but I also didn't want to do something that was too literal. And because of that, I wanted something that had an abstract quality as well. When you look through the main axis of the park, you see the image of the hand. But if you look at the sculpture from other areas in the park, it's an abstraction. It's just these verticals, twisted and bent, that have an upreaching feeling, but it isn't a literal hand. And I like that. I like that you have to sort of discover the piece. You may walk into the park not along the main axis, and you may just see it off to the side, and it would just look like a bunch of steel tubes sort of in a grouping. But there'll be a certain moment when you're moving through the park where you align with the center axis, and all of a sudden it gels, and you're going to go, oh my God, it's a hand, it's an arm. And I think that element of discovery will really add a nice quality to the piece. It isn't something you just go, oh yeah, it's a hand, nice, good, and never look at it again. You'll always, as you come into the park, see it from a different angle, see it from a different light, have to rediscover it. And there's also the opportunity to take someone to show them, oh, you know what this is? Oh, I don't know, what do you think it is? Well, if you stand right here, you can see that it's a hand. And then there's going to be that moment of recognition that the newest visitor to the park will have when they'll see that hand and they'll go, oh, that's what it is. There's also a number of other elements to the piece. Each upright, each steel tube, like I said, is made out of different sections of tube that have been welded together. And I very purposely did not have the welds ground smooth. They're very visible. And I did this on purpose for a number of reasons. One is I frankly just like the added texture of the piece. It gives it a little bit more depth. It gives it a little bit more feeling. If it was all smooth, it would have much more of a plastic look. And I wanted the steel quality to be evident. And I also like these little, very subtle shadows that these welds cast. But even more importantly than sort of that visual quality, there's the symbolic nature of each weld. And how I look at it is that each turn and twist of the tube represents a milestone in the life of an immigrant. You know, coming to this country, that's a milestone. Getting married, that's a milestone. Having a child, getting a job, losing a job, finding friends, buying a house. All the different moments in the life of an immigrant are symbolically noted by the different welds and twists and turns of the sculpture. There's one other aspect of the piece, or one more aspect of the piece, and after I had designed it, I contacted a group in Boston called 826 Boston, and they're another do-gooder organization. They work with young people, and they teach them about writing. And they're all over the country. There's 826 Boston, there's 826 San Francisco, there's 826 New York, and it's a national organization but with local affiliates. And they set up workshops for kids to teach them writing and to help them with their homework and so forth. And I contacted them about halfway into the project, and I said, you know, I'd love to work with the local youth and see if I could get them to develop quotations or little bits of writing that we might somehow incorporate into the piece. And it took quite a bit of organizational skill to do this. I was originally commissioned by the Hyde Square Task Force, which is an organization, and then there's the 826 organization, and they didn't really know too much about each other. They weren't on the same page, and it took a lot of meetings to get them to realize that this was a great collaboration. So when that was finally agreed upon, and that took quite a while, there was a series of workshops that 826 Boston organized, and I sat in on, and we got together a number of kids from the neighborhood, and what we did was got them to write about being an immigrant. What's it like being an immigrant to this country? And we also had them go home and interview their families, and interview their parents, their grandparents, and find out what it was like for them to come to the United States, and what was good and what was bad and what was hard and what was not so hard. And we spent, again, about 4 weeks of workshops writing and editing, and what we came up with was 9 quotations that the kids developed. And each quotation relates to life as an immigrant to the United States. And when we started the project, I liked the idea conceptually of doing this, but I was very frank. When I talked to the kids, when I talked to 826, when I talked to Hyde Square, I said, you know, this is a permanent piece. This is going to be in Boston for the next 100 years. I'm not sticking things on this or including them unless they're great, because I'm not just, this isn't a kid's project. This is a very serious work of art. But when we were done with these workshops, I was just stunned at what came out of it. I was literally brought to tears at one point reading these. And like I said, we came up with 9 quotations that we felt were the best and the most evocative. And like I said, there's 5 uprights for the piece. And so what I decided to do was put 2 quotations on each upright, one on opposite sides, so you couldn't see both at the same time. And yet, there's one missing, because there's 9 quotations, but there's 5 uprights, 2 on each side. That would lend itself to think, oh, we should have 10. But I purposely left one empty. And that's symbolic. That's a symbolic place where future immigrants can put their own quotation. How many people are going to get that or understand that? Probably not a lot, but it's just one more facet to my process to the piece. I wanted future immigrants to be able to relate to this piece. It's a piece about immigration. The neighborhood has always been immigrants. Who knows who will live in this neighborhood in another 50 years, long after we're gone. So I wanted this piece to relate to who we are today, who the community is today, immigrants. I wanted it to relate to who the community was in the past. But I didn't want it to be a piece that stopped now. I wanted it to be a piece that in 50 years, somebody can walk up to it, look at it, explore it, read the quotations and see it relate to their life at that time.